The news, if you like, for us is that wasn't news. It was just yet another case whereby the police, unless there's an absolute body stone cold dead on the ground, don't want to know about it.
In response to the Justice for Nikki campaign, I saw so many comments from local people in Batley and Dewsbury saying that's what it's like up here, this happens all the time. Constantly people telling me they're religiously and racially targeted by members of the Muslim community. So that's brought us back to Batley. I'm in Batley today. I'm going to meet a leading journalist here. A man who started his journalism career 40 years ago in this town. He's run the local newspaper for 25 to 30 years. And we're going to hear from him so he can tell us what it's like here. Was this a one-off? Is this regular? What's it like? Is it other communities policed equally?
I started as a journalist here 40 years ago, and I was the editor-in-chief of the newspaper group that covers all of this area, North Kirklees, from 1993. I set up my own business, my own newspaper in 2002, in large part because I was frustrated at what was happening, and also the fact that the mainstream media was just pretending this wasn't going on. We started our newspaper 15 years ago now with a campaign on the drug problem, and the fact that I have got lots and lots of friends who have lost children and grandchildren to heroin overdoses, and nobody, and it would anywhere else, in any other city, in any other area of criminality, this would be called an epidemic. And I was having and yet felt like I was in a bubble where no one was willing to admit what the problem was, because of which community the problem was rooted in. We have one of the biggest heroin problems in the UK. That, to me, I don't care about the religion, I don't care about the colour, the creed. I care about the crime, and I care about the victims, and I care about the fact that we're creating bigger and bigger, more divisive problems in our communities by failing to address them. Because that is why you've got, two communities completely at odds with each other. We have a climate and a culture now whereby people, particularly in the established white community, the old-fashioned Dewsbury and Batley community, have a sense that there's one set of rules for one community, there's one set of rules for the other.
Kid gloves for the Muslim community.
Yeah, and it isn't just crime as well, it's everything. I mean, we've had electoral fraud. We've had electoral fraud in this town for decades now, whereby intimidation at the polling booth, attacks on candidates, people going around house to house, making people make Muslims making Muslims fill in a ballot form. We've exposed it. We have had one or two really strong, individual Muslim councillors and community representatives from this area who stood up against it and said, listen, we're making a problem for ourselves here by not addressing these problems. So, we get onto a story, we run it, the police turn up, they send a Muslim community liaison officer to talk to the victim. He leaves the incriminating evidence with her and says, do you want to have a think about this for a few days?
See, this is what's happening.
And so then she tears up the ballot paper, which it was actually the daughter,
so
the daughter.
They send a Muslim police officer to the case
to talk her out of making the complaint. This, for a long time, was the police station. You can still see it still is, to all intents and purposes. But all you've got here now is an administrative presence. Basically, the entire police command structure now is 10 miles up the valley at Huddersfield, which has a completely different demographic. It's got all its own different crime issues, if you like, it's different community issues. And I've quite often said that whoever is commanding the police in this division now probably couldn't find Dewsbury and Batley Town Hall if you gave them a sat-nav. There was a Sunday afternoon, and a police cars came upon a public disorder in Ravensthorpe. That's a neighbourhood in Dewsbury, and this was Muslims fighting Muslims. They stopped, they made a couple of arrests, they got the guy in the back of the car. Suddenly, a mob descends on the police car. Yeah. Whatever their call sign is for officer needs assistance, there was one traffic patrol car in this division, which is 180,000 people. He attends, they get the mob, they break it up, they arrest this guy, take him to Dewsbury police station. The next thing you know, the entire arterial route between Huddersfield and Wakefield is shut down with a mob of hundreds who are stoning cars and demanding the release of their friend. Yeah? All of a sudden, the police don't know what to do. They don't know there's a sticker lift. There's hardly enough of them. They've got a call to HQ in Wakefield to get some assistance, some backup. And basically you then have a couple of community figures from the Muslim community come out and agree to negotiate and arbitrate and talk to the gang and talk it all down. They disperse, you know, the guy's released without charge until next time.
Do you know what you've just spoke about there is I spoke about in Birmingham, where I saw that someone bricked a police officer, then all the Muslims come with the imam to the police station, said let him go now, and we read online on one of the left-wing blogs that they let him go. When I went for my next meeting with Birmingham Police, I asked the police officer, did this happen? And he said yes. And I said, so if that happened there, and that's happened multiple times in this area, it's happening across our country, who controls these streets? Is it the police or is it the...
No, it isn't the streets. It isn't the police anymore. And I mean, I mentioned just before we came out a situation last year where there were, I mean, there is gangland crime going on around here on a daily basis, and it self-polices. So we had a case where houses were getting broken into, Muslim houses, where people had gold and a lot of cash on the premises. Old ladies were getting knocked over, someone was coming in robbing them. Obviously an inside job from within the community, but the community set about sorting it out itself. Now, a friend of mine, his brother was up a roof doing a job on a Muslim part of town, and suddenly there's a mob surrounding the house wanting him down because they think he's involved in these robberies. He wasn't. A prominent local Muslim businessman vouched for him, the crowd backed off. He then gets a phone call saying, we want you to come along to a community resolution hearing. And if you know what's good for you, you're going to come. Now that might sound like a threat, but actually he said, no, you've been aggrieved against. It's in your interest, if you want to keep working in our community, for you to turn up. So he did do, middle of the Muslim community in Savile Town. And basically it's a sharia court.
So and he's a non-Muslim.
He's a white guy. He's a tradesman. He's a roofer.
And he's been summoned to a sharia court in this area.
But and he's kind of like, you know, a bit nervous about all of this, because as you would be. But when he goes in, there's a panel sitting there, and the hearing takes place. And basically, he's invited. Would he accept the apology of the people who made the accusation against him? And so obviously, it's in his interest to say yes, you know, get out of there without any more bother. The interesting thing is there's two police officers sat observing.
There's two police sat observing a Sharia court trying a non-Muslim.
Well, they would say it wasn't. They would say it wasn't a Sharia court. Well, but that's what he says. To all intents and purposes, it was.
Being based here for 30 years, seeing everything that's gone on in the stories, what would you say the future is? What would you say the future is for this area?
Well,
how do you see it going?
I wrote a book in 2011 called The Islamic Republic of Dewsbury. And I haven't seen much to change my mind about what's going to happen with this community.
And that book you wrote is extensively looking at what's happened, how it's happened.
It might sound like a little bit of a provocative title for the book, but actually it's more of a social history. It's actually explaining, you know, where the town was, what the town I grew up with my Irish Catholic background, what we were as immigrants, with the Polish immigrants that came after the war, and then the new wave of immigrants of the 50s and 60s, and how that has changed, you know, everything about the town beyond all recognition. Some people will tell you that's cultural enrichment. I can't say that I see or feel that, you know, but I'm still here and still just trying to do a job as a newspaper man and you know, and hold a mirror to the people that are making a lot of decisions that affect a lot of other people and not themselves.
Danny, one thing I'd like to ask about is local politician. This is the area Joe Cox was murdered in.
Indeed it is, yeah. Her office was just 100 yards from us.
So the man who murdered her,
Thomas Mayer.
Because I hear he shouted Britain first or put Britain first.
Yeah, that was... Yeah, friends of mine were witnesses and saw it happen, and I heard about the actual attack on Joe within 20 minutes of it. Tommy Mayer was none and nobody around here. He was a loner, an absolute one-off. He didn't have any political affiliations that we know about. It was just a sad, tragic thing, and I think the groundswell of feeling here was, you know, why don't you pick on somebody your own size, mate? A harmless, you know, well-meaning young lass like Joe. That, you know, it was an absolute tragedy, and in all of my years in journalism, I've never known anything quite like that day and that week in this town.
And so who's Tracy Braben's took over from her?
Tracy Braben, the famous soap actress
Coronation
Tracy.
Street,
Yeah,
was she?
Corrie, I think she's
So-
done a few as Tracy.
What would you say then if people said if all these problems are in this area, which we know about, and the local politician was
Yeah.
Joe Cox,
Yeah.
now it's Tracy Braben,
Yeah.
are they ignoring these issues?
They're part of the problem, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah.
You know, as well-meaning as they may well be as politicians, you don't get elected into office in Dewsbury and Batley unless you nurture a particular part of the voting community, and that voting community is the biggest part of it is the Muslim vote. And of course, you know, this is not news again. The mosques tell people who they're voting for. So whether you're Joe, and Joe was very active at it, Joe played the Muslim card. You know, she went into the mosque. She wore the headscarf. When Tracy was canvassing last year, she was out and about just right behind us in Mount Pleasant, canvassing in a headscarf on a street.
She
now
canvassed out in the street
she
with a
canvassed
headscarf
out
on.
in
The
the
local
street.
Labour politician who's not
The
Muslim.
local Labour politician who's not a husband. She's wearing a headscarf. She's not in a mosque.
She's showing them I'm for you.
She's showing
I
their
will
mind
work-
for
I
you.
will-
I'd like to think that this time for Tracy has only been in office just over a year. I'd like to think there's time for her to see the light and say you've got to actually bring some cohesion to this community, Tracy, and represent both communities, not separately. But when she's going on their radio station talking about the issues in Palestine, when she's talking about global issues that don't affect the price of bread on the high street in Batley,
And young English girls are being their heads caved in week in week regularly.
So you know,
It angers me.
it angers a lot of people, and I get the realpolitik of it.
Is this why non-Muslim people in this area feel sold out for these issues?
It is one of the contributing factors. And as I said, Tracy's new to the job. You'd like to think that she could grow into it and understand that she's becoming, or risks becoming, part of the cultural problem and not the solution. I think it's just this political sensitivity. It's, oh God, you know, we can do without this. We can do without the aggravation. We don't want the BBC or ITV, you know, cameras turning up and actually looking too closely at how rubbish a job we're doing. And it's anything for a quiet life. And if we pretend hard enough that there isn't a problem here, then maybe, you know, I can see out my time and get my promotion home and move on to the next thing and let it be someone else's problem. I think that is as much to do with as anything else.
This has become a lot bigger now than just justice for Nikki. We've now found out that these problems are embedded here, and this is a common theme where the police just don't deal with the Muslim criminals. They're allowed to get away with whatever they want in this community. People are continually being beaten up and attacked, and the police are not doing anything. So what I'm asking you to do is continue signing that petition. I'm going to spend more days up here next week interviewing more members of the public to find out how bad and how embedded this problem is in Dewsbury and in Batley. If you can sign the petition at justicefornikki.com and give me more ammunition, so when I do find Mohammed Ralph, who's the Muslim inspector for this area, the police aren't doing anything, then I have a bigger array of signatures to give them. I think at the minute we're over 20,000. We want up to 50,000. So please keep signing, keep sharing, share these videos.